thank you all for joining us on this beautiful evening. Audience as well. I'm Madeline Ross. I'm president of the U.S. China Education Trust. And this program tonight is the 8th and final event in our Asian Women Trailblazers series. We've been running since 2021. The celebration of Asian American Heritage Month put together Trailblazers some recent developments right here in Washington, D.C.'s Chinatown. So before we do that, I'd like to begin with some important acknowledgments. First, to the USET staff, especially Ye Shun, Emily Brigham, and David Yao, for their work on all aspects of this event. And to the several volunteers who are here tonight. There's a lot of moving parts. Thank you for your patience as we get things organized. This event is about communities, and we couldn't have put it all together without a community of support from individuals and organizations who share USIT's commitment to spotlighting the critical role of Asian Americans in American society. This community includes the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the 1882 Foundation, the Rose Group for Cultural Understanding, Cross-Cultural Understanding, and Chang Chang. If you don't know what Chang Chang is, you'll find out firsthand at the reception tonight, which begins sometime after 6 when the panel is finished. So thank you very much to all of these people for bringing us here tonight. And there's one more key source of support that deserves special mention. Up here on the list, the Ruth Kuo and Rhoda Howe Memorial Foundation Fund. We have with us tonight online a person with a very special connection to the fund. And I would now like to turn the microphone over to Julia Chang Locke, who is a former ambassador, founder, and executive chairman of USIT, to say a few words about this special connection. Julia.
Thank you, Madeline. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's really good to see you all. Thank you for coming. I have the privilege today of recognizing someone who, unbeknownst to him, made possible one of U.S. China Education Trust's most popular programs, this one, the Asian Women Trailblazer series. By an extraordinary coincidence, last weekend in New York City, I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Julian Suez. Ah, there he is. The son of Rhoda Howe and nephew of Ruth Kuo. Julian and I had never met. He had in recent years lost touch with the fund, and I did not know, I really did not know, he endowed the Ruth Kuo and Rhoda Howe Memorial Fund, we call it RKRH, in honor of his mother and aunt, and entrusted the fund to the care of a cousin, Pauline Sui. I think some in this audience, you must know her, with whom I co-founded the Organization of Chinese American Women in 1977. Now you know how old I am. Serendipitously, I was able to invite him just in time to attend the 8th, and as Madeline said, last program in the Trailblazer series funded by RKRH. Although, as you can see, he's not here in person, he is in the virtual audience, and you can meet him, unfortunately, only via his photo on the screen, taken on his 90th birthday. Julian, I hope you are watching and hearing this. We are so grateful for your vision. Aunt and Pauline's dedication to the advocacy of Asian women's rights and promotion of achievements of Asian American women in leadership and service. Pauline, as you know, probably inherited from your mother and aunt. She was passionate about getting Asian American women their due. And I see many Asian American women in this audience. And you would appreciate, Pauline, if you didn't have a chance, opportunity to know. RKRH support helped. You said provide scholarships to deserving and underprivileged Chinese female students as early as 2011. RKRH, moreover, helped fund USED's entire Trailblazers series. Taking inspiration from this evening's event, or this afternoon's event, we are launching a new series on heritage, culture, and community. And we hope that RKRH's legacy will live on. Finally, I would like to take a moment to thank Madeleine Ross at this, her last official event as USED's president before she retires in June. Thank you, Madeleine. She is a trailblazer herself, one of the first Americans to go to China immediately after normalization 45 years ago. That was back in 1979. She went to Fudan University and is an honorary Shanghainese among those of us from Shanghai. How many? Are there anyone here from Shanghai? Anybody? Raise your hand. Nobody? Oh, what? You got you and I, okay? Usually there are many, many more, but nevertheless, we have to move on. Madeleine has helped immeasurably to strengthen USED and expand our program. We look forward, Madeleine, to staying connected with you as you assume the mantle of President Emeritus of USED. We will miss you, but I know you will always be here with us, for us. And now let's move to tonight's, or this afternoon's, because it's all very bright outside. Main event. I am delighted to turn the floor over to our moderator, Ms. Jianling Liu, who is an author, a globe-trotting culinary journalist, and founder of the Beijing cooking school Black Sesame Kitchen. I've been there. And now events director at Chen Chang. Jen, it's all yours.
Thank you, Julia. Welcome everyone tonight, and thank you for joining us here live. I know a lot of these events have been virtual, so it's fantastic that we're all able to be in the same room again. I'm going to introduce our panelists very quickly. We have Grace Young, the stir-fry guru. That's how she's known on her Instagram handle. She has been a cookbook author for many years, and she is going to talk about her Chinatown advocacy that has thrust her into the spotlight ever since 2020, when the pandemic began. We have Di Gao with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. She has been working on a project with Google. It is a virtual museum called America's Chinatowns, and it is just launched. It is an amazing trove of information about Chinatowns across the United States. And we also have Penny Lee joining us tonight. She is a documentary filmmaker. Her documentary, A Tale of Three Chinatowns, is currently streaming on PBS. You have to see it. Take a look at Boston, DC, and Chicago's Chinatowns. And she has also worked with 1882 Foundation here in DC with Ted Gong on a series of short films about people in Chinatown, and I found that absolutely fascinating. So thank you. Let's give these women a quick round of applause, and a round of applause for being here. I'm going to start out with Grace. Grace and I have known each other for just a little over a year in person, but I have been following Grace my whole career as a food writer and cooking school founder in Beijing. She wrote an amazing cookbook called Stir Frying to the Sky's Edge, published 2008 or around then.
2004.
Oh, 2004, okay. And so I've known her in that capacity for a long time. And then during the pandemic, Grace's presence blew up on social media. And so she's going to tell the story. So why don't we just say a little bit about what happened to you during the pandemic?
Thank you for that introduction, Jen. In 2020, at the start of the year, January, I was planning on beginning work on a new cookbook. And before there were any incidents of COVID in New York City's Chinatown or in any Chinatowns across the country, New York City's Chinatown suddenly became a ghost town overnight because of the rhetoric coming from Washington that COVID was China virus, Wuhan virus, Kung flu. So New York City's Chinatown, businesses, the streets became empty, walking down the sidewalks, glancing into stores, glancing into restaurants, totally empty. January was a very, very cold time for New York City. Street vendors had absolutely no business. And I was just appalled that people made the connection that if they went to Chinatown, they could catch COVID. So I started doing some Instagram and Facebook posts saying that Chinatown was perfectly safe and that if we didn't support these little mom and pop restaurants, markets, bakeries, grocery stores, that there was no way these businesses could survive.
You were really brave then, because even people in my own family were telling me not to go to my Chinese supermarket. I mean, we heard that from our family and friends. And for you, remember, this is a time when we didn't know what COVID was, how it was spread. So you were bold and brave to go out there.
But at that point, there really wasn't COVID. So,
but even after COVID started spreading, you still went. So,
yes, I still went. But so I just started doing these posts, and Food and Wine magazine, because I am a cookbook author, I'm known in the food world. One of the editors reached out to me and said, could I write an article about the importance of supporting Chinatown? And I'm very grateful to her for that. But the real turning point was in March. On Friday, March 13th, I received a phone call from the director of Poster House Museum, which is this wonderful museum that had just opened recently. And they had a Chinese exhibition called The Sleeping Giant. And they had reached out to me and asked me if I would do some cultural lectures about food for them. So I'd never met the director. I didn't even know her name. Julia Knight, the director, calls me and says, all museums have shut in New York City, and we know Chinatown is hurting. Is there anything we can do? So I was completely stunned. At that point, I had witnessed about 10 weeks of Chinatown becoming this ghost town. And it was just stunning that an institution that had nothing to do with Chinese culture or Asian American culture would have this kind of heart. So I said, I had this idea that I wanted to go into Chinatown and interview owners of restaurants and mom and pop businesses. And I thought that if I posted those videos on Instagram and Facebook and people heard the hardships that these businesses were going through, they would rally support. And so she said, if you do these interviews, we will post them on the Poster House website. So they are called Coronavirus Chinatown Stories, and these videos are still on the Poster House website. So she said, how soon can you do it? I said, this weekend. So I put a post on Instagram asking for a videographer to volunteer his time. And by Sunday, we were in Chinatown. And we were shooting we did these interviews a few hours before Mayor de Blasio actually announced that New York City was going into lockdown. So they are an important oral history of Chinatown at one of its darkest moments. And on Saturday, I had gone down to sort of scope out who would be willing to do these interviews, and every business said no. And finally, one person said to me, for the Chinese, it's just a loss of face. Nobody wants to go on camera and tell them that their business is failing. And the person said to me, you won't get anyone to do an interview. So I had one friend who had this little Malaysian French restaurant, a woman, women speak up. She was willing to speak. Mei Chow of Oze Peace. And we did the interview with her, and she was so feisty and strong. And she said, yeah, business is really bad, but we're an all-women kitchen. It's just a tiny little mom and pop restaurant. And she said, we're not backing down. We're staying open.
It's a Vietnamese French bistro?
No, Malaysian
French. Okay, Malaysian French bistro.
Yeah.
Really cute, looks like something you would find maybe in Southeast Asia or.
Fabulous food and customers who had been coming to her for years. She had another restaurant, so she had this long following in downtown. So we did that interview, and then I got a call from a man that I know, Jan Lee, who had helped me set up an interview for the Food and Wine interview with one of Chinatown's oldest restaurants, Hop Key. It dates from 1967. And he said, Peter Lee is willing to talk to you, but you have to get over here quick. So we run to Hop Key, and Peter Lee, and so after this gentleman said to me the day before, no one is willing to talk to you, I was really treading carefully. I didn't want to ask any pointed questions to scare people. I didn't want to say, how much money have you lost? How bad is it? You know, so I was very careful in conducting the interview. But he said that his employees had been with him 10, 20 plus years, that they were all like family, and that business had dropped 80%. They couldn't continue like this. He had to shut down the following day, and he had tears in his eyes. For me, to see someone who is Chinese American show that amount of emotion and to be willing to be filmed on camera was very powerful. He brought me into the kitchen. I've been into many restaurant kitchens. Chinese kitchens are always loud. The sound of the woks going, the chopping, the washing of the dishes. This kitchen was silent. There were only 2 customers in the restaurant. And the look on the faces of everyone from the dishwasher to the chef to the waiters, they had a look on their face that I can only describe as everybody knew we were in trouble, and everybody knew that the situation was horrible, and no one knew what was ahead of us.
Yeah. Can you talk also, I really love the story about the stir-frying Meals on Wheels. I think a lot of people haven't heard of, have heard of Meals on Wheels, but not stir-frying Meals on Wheels. So
Yeah.
Can you just tell?
So that day, Jan Lee introduced me to this gentleman named Don Lee, who has always been, has been an advocate and activist within Chinatown for years, and he was the president of Home Press Community Service, which was a senior community center in Brooklyn. And he realized that all his seniors who used to come into Home Press for meals for lunch every day were afraid to come in. So this is the moment de Blasio puts us into lockdown. So this stir-fry Meals on Wheels video that we did, the interview was done maybe a month later. But Don realized that all these seniors weren't getting their meal, and that their lunch meal was sometimes the most important meal for them, because they had such little money that they would eat part of their lunch and save it for dinner. So he found a restaurant in Brooklyn willing to cook meals, willing to open up, cook meals, and then he had, I believe, nearly 200 volunteers that were driving all around Brooklyn, delivering these meals every single day. I believe he delivered over 40,000 meals. So, and without funding from the city, because the city was not recognizing that these seniors were in a situation that required our support. So he raised money, and I also was able to help do posts on Facebook and Instagram saying that we need to give money to Homecrest Community Services.
Well, I think we have found people reacted to your work so sentimentally and with so much, it made an impact because you gave people who didn't have a voice. And that's what a good journalist, a good reporter does, is we go out and make people see things from a side that they don't necessarily see from the beginning. So I'm going to bring in Penny here, and welcome, Penny. Thank you for all of your amazing work. You have been giving people in Chinatowns, residents of Chinatown, former residents as well, a voice. Can you describe, just real briefly, how you came to that work?
How this all came about for me. My documentary producing and directing start really just began 10 years ago. My background is I'm a film and television editor. I've been doing that for many, many years. Until 10 years ago, I met Ted Gong from the 1882 Foundation. And we worked together in partnership to produce a film called Through Chinatown's Eyes, April 1968, currently on Amazon Prime. And that film is about what happened in DC Chinatown after the 1968 assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how the events and the riots and everything affected the residents that lived in DC Chinatown. My feeling about documentaries is I like to use voices from the subjects to tell my stories. And through that film, after we finished that film, and someone came up to me and asked me and my co-producer, my business partner, Lisa Mao, what were we going to do next? And so in the first film, we talked about DC Chinatown, but we really didn't go in depth about DC's Chinatown. So we decided to do another film, and we called it A Tale of Three Chinatowns, and we covered Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Boston. And we decided on these three cities based because we've got Washington, D.C., and it doesn't look that great, but then on the flip side, Chicago was doing really well. And then Boston was kind of in between. So just through research and interviews, we kind of listened to everybody's stories and ended up, making our film, which is really about the challenges of residents and businesses in these cities and what they're facing through the years and how they're coping, the survival of urban development, displacement, gentrification. So all these issues, we try to have our storytellers, who is our subjects. They are residents, they're business owners, they're people who advocate for Chinatowns, government officials, and a historian to put it all together.
So I wanted to bring in Dee Gao as well with a question that I want actually all three of you to answer, but I'll have Dee start with this one. My question is, what are your own personal connections to Chinatown?
Sure.
And actually, you guys, I did a pre-interview, and you guys have an interesting theme between the three of you.
Oh, interesting. curious to discover that. So my personal connection to Chinatown really comes from, I think, my family and my upbringing. My family experienced Chinatown as new immigrants. I was born in Shanghai, came over when I was 3, and my father had an office in Seattle's Chinatown when I was growing up. So I didn't grow up in Chinatown, but I grew up going to Chinatown. And as I got older, Chinatown was really, a place I could go to connect to my cultural heritage. And that became more and more important to me as I came of age. And then when I came to the East Coast for college, I found myself living in the heart of Manhattan's Chinatown on Pell Street. And that was actually the reason, that neighborhood, the history that you could feel kind of pulsating through the streets and in all the buildings, was the reason I got into the field of historic preservation, and why I'm today at the National Trust.
For me, I was born in San Francisco, and we did not live in Chinatown, but my father was a liquor salesman, and most of his accounts were in San Francisco's Chinatown. So I grew up being in Chinatown quite often with him, especially in the summer when I didn't have school. Sometimes I would ride in the car with him the whole day, and then he would go every day. He ended up in Chinatown. And now seeing what San Francisco's Chinatown is like, I realized that these were the glory days of Chinatown in the 1960s. And I love that feeling of walking down Grant Avenue with my father. It's really, I call it small town America, where every few steps, somebody would call out my father's name, or my father would bump into somebody that he knew. So there was just such a sense of community. He knew just about every single shop and restaurant. When we ate in a restaurant, we never ordered from the menu. He knew every owner who was the chef, so he would just waltz into the kitchen and talk to the chef and find out what was freshest that day, and then he would come out, and that's how we would have our dinners or meals in Chinatown. But I just love that feeling of community and the culture and the history. We had our Chinese New Year's meals every year. The family would gather. We would have banquet meals, I would think, I would guess at least a dozen times a year, from weddings to birthdays, anniversaries, Chinese New Year's. And yeah, in those days, Chinatown had at easily 16 restaurants that served banquet meals. And today in San Francisco's Chinatown, there's only one restaurant left. And then here in New York City, when I came here, because I'm a cookbook author, I was constantly shopping in New York City's Chinatown. And I would have said pre-pandemic that I love Chinatown, but during the pandemic, I realized that I'd taken Chinatown for granted. I assumed Chinatown would always be a part of my life. And when I saw so many old legacy businesses disappear in those first months of COVID, I realized that if we didn't all step up and protect Chinatown, that we could lose it.
Penny, can you talk about your experiences with Chinatown growing up?
Yeah, you're correct. I agree with you, Grace. DC Chinatown is declining, but there's hope. But I guess in the past 40 years, 50 years, I'm going to say since the riots, and since the convention center on H Street, the old DC Convention Center was built in DC Chinatown, there was a lot of displacement residents, at least for DC. I feel first displacement of residents, then businesses.
Can you talk about your connection to Chinatown, your personal connection?
I immigrated here from Hong Kong. Grew up in the 70s, but I didn't live in Chinatown. I live in Columbia Heights, but I would go to Chinatown all the time to see my friends. That was my community. And even as a small child, I would take the bus down to Chinatown, and it was safe for some reason back then. Okay, then I went to college at University of Maryland, and then currently I live in Silver Spring. But my connection to Chinatown right now is I am the public relations officer with the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association. I'm also the secretary of the Chinese Youth Club. These two organizations has been around in DC Chinatown for a long time. And although I don't physically live in Chinatown, I feel connected by being part of this organization where I can give back as a volunteer to help however I can to continue to promote our causes and support Chinatown.
Right, so I wanted to just bring that up because as a devil's advocate, I'm going to say this, that there is a typical immigration pattern in the US that some Asians begin in Chinatowns, quite a few, and then they make more money, they work their way up, and then they move to the suburbs. Some outsiders may argue that losing Chinatown is a sign of immigrants achieving the American dream, or that such immigrants don't want to be in those neighborhoods anyways. What would you guys say in response?
I can start.
So I guess I would flip that and say Chinatown is what made my family's American dream possible. It's a place where my father was able to start his own business because I think a lot of Chinese immigrants are excluded from the mainstream economy and have trouble through language barriers, through other systemic barriers to achieving access to employment opportunities. And so I think as we see today, Chinatowns are these rich communities of mom and pop businesses, of small family businesses, my family included, and that wouldn't have been able to happen without Chinatown. And yes, my dad did see it as a benchmark of I can move out of Chinatown now. I don't have to go to Chinatown anymore because I think in the 20 years that he was there, he definitely saw the neighborhood decline. But I think we're seeing a resurgence with newer generations like myself that feel this kinship and this intense sense of belonging in Chinatown. We even though we didn't grow up inside, we don't live there today, but we go every chance we get because we're seeking this community that you can't find anywhere else.
I agree with you. I know back in the days, Chinatowns are established because immigrants needed a place to start, to live, because they don't speak English. And they have people that look like them, and so look like us, and so we feel comfortable in that community. That's how it started out. Today it's different. And immigrants here have families already out in the suburbs, perhaps, so they don't come straight to Chinatown anymore. So I think the situation is different. Times have changed, and generations are different. They just have changed, but doesn't mean that, to me, in my opinion, doesn't mean that shouldn't be a Chinatown anymore. Okay, and it also depends on where you live. You know, does this Chinatown have a place where I can go and get good chow siu baos and, you know, food and vegetables like we have in the suburbs? Yes or no? Is there a purpose? Well, if we bring back more businesses and have these stores and restaurants, and I think we'll come back to Chinatown. We'll thrive again. It all depends.
I think you're absolutely right. There are plenty of people who achieve the American dream and move out of Chinatown, but the vast majority of people in Chinatown love it and would love to remain and to maintain their stores and their restaurants. And I think for me, Chinatowns embody culture, history, tradition, but most of all, community. And they are a reflection of America's diversity. They tell the American story. And before COVID, I would have said Chinatowns tell the Chinese American story. And during COVID, I realized Chinatowns are the ultimate American story. And that's so important for us to protect it. We are a country of immigrants, and what other historic immigrant enclave is left in this country for us to see? In New York City's Chinatown, the oldest tenement building, the first tenement building, is on Mott Street, and it's 200 years old this year. And long before the Chinese came, the Irish, the Italians, the Jews, the Germans lived there. So when you're in Chinatown, you are actually witnessing the American story.
I'm gonna add just one last thing is Chinatowns is also for the elderly. You know, the elderly, they love being in Chinatown because they don't want to be living in the suburbs and can't get around without a ride from their kids. And they will feel stuck there and be lonely. But if they're in Chinatown, they're with other people like their age that they can hang around with and talk to, play mahjong with. And in every Chinatown, I believe, at least the major ones, there is a senior citizens building where you'll find where all the elderly people live, and they love it.
So is it agreed upon between all of you that sort of overall Chinatowns in terms of population are declining across the United States? Have you guys seen that for each of you? Is that the experience? What about the Chicago Chinatown that you covered?
Yeah, Chicago Chinatown is an exception because they are not located in downtown. Chicago Chinatown is not in the middle of downtown like Boston, DC, Philadelphia
Anymore.
anymore.
The original one was, but then,
The original Chinatown was, but then they moved out to a piece of land outside, right outside Chicago. But the thing is, they have room to expand, and that's why they're thriving, because of the land surrounding, you know, after they moved out to Chicago. Whereas a lot of major cities like DC and Boston, we're right in the middle of downtown. What else can we build affordable housing that would help?
What I learned, and that was fascinating from your films, is that DC Chinatown actually is not where it is the very small DC Chinatown that we have. It actually started near the Federal Triangle area.
Pennsylvania Avenue, between 3rd and 4th Street on Pennsylvania Avenue South Side. That was where the original DC Chinatown was. When the federal government decided they wanted to clean up and build the Federal Triangle, Chinatown was moved to H Street.
And how did they move it? How did that happen? Was it just the federal government giving the Chinatown residents housing up there, a little north?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have anyone who is living who can tell us that story. So a lot of it is, you know, through history. But just physically, I think back then, very few Chinese owned the buildings, and at least the businesses, and they live upstairs. So they don't own it, so when their lease is up, you have to go somewhere else. And somehow, you know, H Street, they went and started businesses on H Street, but still at that time, they don't own the property, the restaurants, the grocery stores. It wasn't until much later when they're able to buy the land, buy the buildings. So it was discrimination back then or something.
Yeah, I mean, another interesting story that I learned from your documentaries is about the Jews and how they helped Chinese buy property because Chinese weren't allowed to buy property back then, and so they would put it in the names of friends who were Jewish or, you know, business associates, and then it would be transferred later on. That was absolutely fascinating. Dee, did you want to add something to?
yeah, I think it's not just DC's Chinatown and Chicago's Chinatown, but I think it's important to point out that nationally, Chinatowns all over the country often were forced to move due to development pressure and due to or eminent domain. And we're seeing this pattern continue to this day, where Chinatowns that are still functioning as thriving neighborhoods continue to have to fight to remain in place and continue to fight for their existence. And I think one of the powerful things about history and preserving Chinatowns, particularly the historic Chinatowns, we also need to acknowledge that not all Chinatowns are the same. There are so many different types. There are Chinatowns, that formed in the 1800s, the most, the historic ones, earliest documented Chinatowns like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Washington, D.C., but then there's also more recent ones that are still coming, and those are thriving and growing, like Flushing in New York, or I'm sure suburbs in the D.C. area as well. Sorry?
Because they're not downtown.
Yeah, there's room to grow, there's housing, they're not in kind of these, these tenement buildings that largely need to be updated.
I wanted you to mention how you have a list of the most endangered sites in the country.
Thank you. That was the point that I was trying to get to, where Chinatowns across the country are facing these systemic threats. And last year, as part of the National Trust's America's Chinatowns initiative, we were able to sorry, let me back up. The National Trust for Historic Preservation is the largest nonprofit dedicated to saving America's historic places. We're a 75-year-old organization. For the past 36 years, we've been running an advocacy campaign called the 11 Most Endangered List, and it raises awareness and attention to places that are of value, that are under threat. And for the first time in 36 years, last year, on that list. Seattle, Chinatown International District, facing a transit expansion, and Philadelphia Chinatown, which currently is facing a very high-profile situation where they're trying to build a $1 billion arena right outside of the neighborhood. And this is simply to call attention to this trend, this systemic trend, that these Chinatowns on opposite sides of the country are facing similar issues where they are being forced to accept this kind of disproportionate impact, disproportionate harm for progress that's supposed to benefit everyone. And this isn't new. This is part of a very long tradition in this country, and we wanted to raise awareness.
I really urge everyone to check out this, the virtual museum that you have online, America's Chinatowns. I also discovered from that it's so extensive. I grew up in a very undiverse part of Southern California, Riverside County, and I found out from your information that there was a Chinatown there, which I would have never guessed, because I think we were the first family in our neighborhood to be Chinese, and we got stink bombed as kids because we were, the only Asian family in the neighborhood. So let's just talk a little bit about, we don't have a lot of time, but let's talk a little bit about the future of DC's Chinatown, since this is DC after all, and we are technically kind of almost in Chinatown right here. Is this in the boundaries?
Yes. Okay. So right now, currently, in January, Mayor Muriel Bowser created a task force called the Gallery Place Chinatown Task Force. And I have a slide. Oh, here you go. So through the past couple of months, they've had meetings and bringing community leaders together, stakeholders, and residents to get input. So they're going through all these meetings, and they came up with these 8 ideas that I have listed. Just real quick, okay, for example, Gallery Square and Walk, which is portrait gallery right in the middle. So they're proposing to close the street and have more pedestrians, walkways, vendors, and activities around there. Arena, number 2, Arena as Great Neighbor. So this is the arena page. I have more slides. Do we have time to show my slides?
I think we're going to just do this slide, and then later, during the Q&A or during the reception, we can do a few more. Yeah.
So I'm gonna have to go through
Yeah.
this really quickly.
Yeah.
7th Street sign, this is number 3, 7th Street's right here. Their planning is to, have more like sidewalk, widening the sidewalk so people can,
So does that mean getting rid of streets? Getting rid of like just pedestrian streets?
yeah. Let me go back to 1. This is 8th Street. You're thinking about closing, well, right now on 8th Street, you have the sidewalk on the side and the cars are in the middle. They're proposing, like putting the street, the pedestrian walk in the middle and have each sidewalk be the street, like one way here and the other way back. The slide back. But anyway, that's what they're proposing, so that we can have more people walk in the middle of the street. They want to have more greens, botanical street. So number 4, they're proposing to just add more trees to give more shade throughout the whole area that they're going to develop. Number 5 is judicial gardens, which is right here where the courthouses are. They're going to improve the garden in the middle courtyard. Number 6 is Chinatown. So this is Chinatown over here. So this is all work in progress. So for Chinatown, they're thinking about perhaps hanging more lanterns through the street to make it more appealing and attractive, bringing in more businesses. We're hoping there will be a grocery store. I might tell you now. They're hoping there will be more of a grocery store, which is much needed, and more affordable housing so people can move back into the community.
And when you say they, do you mean the city or do you mean developers or who is going to do this?
The city is going to work with developers through, I guess the city might fund it, but they'll work with the developers. This is all.
And what do you think of the plan?
I think this is an improvement. I think it's a great start. It's on paper, there's slides, presentations, but it's still a work in progress. I mean, we still need affordable housing to increase, people coming back. I mean, we can't have $1 million condos and apartments all the time. Well, we're, the necessity is the need it. What do we need right away is kind of like the issues.
So currently there are, I think I looked up the statistic, 300 Chinese living in Chinatown.
Yeah.
Do we know the population of Chinatown? 300 of how many are in
I
Chinatown?
don't have the exact
Yeah.
census numbers, but it's about approximately 300, and those are mostly the seniors that are living at Wong Luk House and Museum Square.
So they're mostly concentrated in those 2 buildings.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we have an issue with Museum Square residents, and they're being displaced because that building is being sold. So we have residents there that are going to be displaced if they have nowhere else to move to.
Are they tearing down the building?
They're still in the building right now, so it's an ongoing controversial situation, and I don't have the answers or solutions to that right now.
Okay. We're going to open it up to questions in just a second, but I wanted to kind of, go back to this question of why it's important to protect, preserve, and celebrate Chinatowns. Do you guys each want to take a stab at that?
I have been trying to monitor what's been happening to Chinatowns all across the country. I was in Honolulu's Chinatown in January. I'm always keeping tabs on what's happening to San Francisco and Oakland. Those 3 Chinatowns are historic Chinatowns. They're quiet at 3 in the afternoon. At lunchtime, they're all adjacent to their financial districts. People haven't returned to work, and so they've lost their lunch business. And because of anti-Asian hate crimes, lots of people are still afraid to come out at night for their usual dinners. Chinatowns all across the United States used to be open until 1, 2, 3 a.m. in the morning. They were known as the safest places to be in New York City's Chinatown. After you would go to a game at Madison Square Garden or a rock concert or whatever your late night activity was, you'd go to Chinatown for food. The WOHOP, as recently as like 10 years ago, would be open till like 4 a.m. in the morning. Now in New York City's Chinatown, there's only 4 restaurants that are open till 10 p.m. at night. Majority of restaurants are closing by 7:30 or 8. And so, as I said before, these immigrant enclaves tell our story, and they make our country richer for their existence because our history, our traditions, our food brings a depth of richness to our lives. And I think the other thing that people don't seem to realize is the majority of all of the Chinatowns are 94%, 95, 96% mom and pop, which used to be the backbone of this country. And we are such an online society now. Everyone's so accustomed to scrolling and clicking, or going to a big box store to buy your food at Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, whatever, Costco. But when you go to Chinatown, when you go to these online stores or when you go to these big box stores, you can't feel the heart and soul of the businesses that you experience when you go to Chinatown. When you see a mom and pop owner who has, their kids doing their homework in the back room, you want them to succeed. There is a fruit vendor in New York City's Chinatown who's been there for years on Mulberry and Canal Street. She is the American dream. She has 4 kids. 1 daughter is at Harvard and 1 daughter is at Columbia University. I see her on the hottest, most humid day in New York City, standing there selling fruit until 9 o'clock at night. I see her on the coldest, most bitter winter day. And she said to me recently, I can barely walk from standing on concrete. But she's achieved the American dream, and you want her to succeed. You want all these little mom and pops to succeed. And it reminds us of our humanity to be in Chinatown.
That's so well said. In my position at the National Trust, I've had the privilege of speaking with hundreds of community activists and people working to preserve their local Chinatowns across the country. And I guess the 2 things I hear the most often, well, it's hard to say because everyone's reason for preserving Chinatown is really quite different, and different things resonate to different people. But 2 things that really stick out to me are, 1, it's important to preserve our connections to our past, and Chinatowns are physical places that can tell that story, not because we're fixated on the past, but because because the past tells us about ourselves today and who we are today, why we are behaving the way we are today, and who we can aspire to be in the future. The rise of anti-Asian hate did not start in 2020. It's part of a long history, and that dark history is embodied in places like Chinatowns, and it's really important that we preserve these places that hold these memories so that we can be our best selves in the future. The second thing, I was thinking about what you were talking about with the meals for the seniors. Chinatowns are also these rich communities that are rooted in mutual aid and this form of community building that I think a lot of us are striving to go back to. Urban planners can't plan a neighborhood as rich and thriving as Chinatowns organically are today. And there's just so much in that, that once it's gone, it's gone. And so we need to do our best to support and sustain them, and not freeze them in time, but to really allow them to thrive in their authentic ways.
Wow. So in my film, Andrew Leon asked the question, who is Chinatown for? Who is Chinatown for? Think about it. Everybody might have a different answer. But Chinatown is for everybody. It's for everybody, not just residents, not just it's for tourists. It's for residents. It's for, friends, families. Where are you going to have a Chinese New Year parade? In Chinatown. We're not going to have it in the suburbs. It's a symbolic space for all Chinese Americans, yes, but it's for everybody. So Chinatown is a place where we welcome everybody to come shop, to come buy food, eat food, hang out, meet up, have coffee in the evening with your friends if they live there. So that's how I'm going to end it. You think about it. Who is it for?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I would just say that, I've struggled with that question as well, being somebody who did not grow up in Chinatown, but I did spend a lot of time in Chinatown as a Columbia journalism student. That was my beat, going down to Chinatown and spending time with the cops and the benevolent associations, and then from there I went to China I was in the real Chinatown, China for about 20 years. And then I came back recently, and I've been trying to figure out what does China need, because it's been such a big part of my life. But I think that it really does, as you said, it's for tourists, it's for the residents, of course. Of course, the residents are probably the most important. For the visitors like us, I think it gives us an intangible sense of belonging. We belong there. We don't have to explain who we are when we're in Chinatown. We don't have to explain our food. We don't have to, we can speak in our own languages. But I think, and also the historical thing is really important too, just recording that history. You have to wonder if Chinatowns probably wouldn't have existed if it hadn't been for the 1882 Exclusion Act, or the fact that, immigration was so limited from the Pacific side, from Asia, whereas Europeans were coming for decades, centuries. So I think that Chinatown did come out of that necessity, and that, the ghetto, ghettoizing people in one area. And now it's something that we can actually celebrate, because that we want to appreciate that diversity. But I will also just make one more point, which is that for the residents of Chinatown, it's home. And for a lot of those people, they have left their country, they have moved all the way across the world to a new home. And for them, that is their home. And if they are not at the table, they don't have a way of having a say or a voice. That is what I don't think we think about as much. There were a neighborhood in Cleveland Park, for example, where we had eminent domain, and everybody was told to leave. We would be up in arms about that, wouldn't we? But not with Chinatown. So I'll just leave it on that note, and I want to give a round of applause.
I've got a couple photos that I bought,
Okay.
and you just revisit and these archival old photos. You'll see how Chinatown used to look like, and people that lived there, and so forth.
Yeah, and so Penny, I think let's save that for small groups after the question and answer, and people can come and talk to each of you during the reception. Please, let's give a round of applause to. And we'll take about 10 minutes of questions before we turn up for the reception. So who would like to ask one of us a question?
Hi, thank you guys so much for this presentation. We appreciate you taking the time to talk about Chinatown, especially right here in historic DC Chinatown. I think one thing, my name is Pamela Eads.
Yes, I was going to say, introduce yourself.
I'm the executive director of Chef Saki API Hate. founded by Chef Kevin Tian and Tim Ma, who actually both now have multiple businesses back here in Chinatown. So we're really excited about that. I think one of the things I can fill in for how Chinatown moved, what happened from H Street here, I'm also a fourth generation Washingtonian, is that in relocating, the government did not help. They did not provide funds. You know who helped was the two Chinatown associations, one of whom, for any longtime DC Chinese, was a Hip home, right? So that is one of our volleyball 9-man teams actually named Hip Sing after them. And it was the communities themselves that supported the residents in their relocation. So I think as we look about what Chinatown is now, right, and the residents are there, but they're few, they're older, and it is hard for them to organize, have a voice, and advocate for themselves. I think looking about what the next step is about bringing younger Chinese, younger APIs back into the areas and do what we have always done, which is to support our own communities, to support our elderly. So I'm really interested in asking the panel, because obviously coming from a place of chefs, right, we do have thoughts about bringing our businesses and opening restaurants back in Chinatown, right? But there's a modernization that we, as chefs, would like to see, and how do we support bringing Chinatown to the younger generation, where it's not just also, cheap eats and knockoffs.
So what's your question?
Right, so how do we bring in young people and young API members of the community back into Chinatown? And what would your suggestions be?
That's a huge question, but in New York City's Chinatown, we're very lucky. There's a restaurant called Potluck Club, and it's started by 4 or 5 partners. They're, I believe, late 20s, early 30s, and one of them is a chef who has worked in Western restaurants. And so the style of food is Cantonese food, basically, with sort of his little take on it, right? So it's very hip, delicious food, and it has brought that younger generation into Chinatown. So my focus has been on saving all the old restaurants. I got so scared in 2020 when we lost 3 or 4 of the restaurants that were 50 years old, 65 years old, a produce market that was 40. So my focus has been, we have to rescue all the old Cantonese because they tell our history. They remind me of my past. They remind me of my father, the restaurants he used to bring me to. And I was resistant to Potluck Club. It was just oh, I'm not going there. I'm spending my money with the old restaurants. But I do see how much energy and vitality and life force these guys are bringing. The food is really fantastic, and they're opening another restaurant. I think that is a really positive thing to bring young Asian chefs into Chinatown, and also not just Chinese, because Chinatown in New York has, Thai restaurants, Vietnamese restaurants. It's about the inclusion of all Asian Americans. And also in New York City, we're so lucky. We have all these amazing young people that have started nonprofits to revitalize Chinatown. We have Welcome to Chinatown, Send Chinatown Love. There's Think Chinatown, and they are coming up with ways to, they have really cool social media people on staff that do a roundup of great bakeries to go to, or different things that you can do, or Think Chinatown is doing a dumpling making class. So, or they're doing
Really killer night market.
Killer night market, that's right. So it is to bring that blood and vitality back into the community.
Yeah, you took one of my points right out of my mouth. I think there are these new intergenerational community-based organizations that are activating Gen Z, activating like the newer generations more than anything I've ever seen, and bringing them back into Chinatown. Like Welcome to Chinatown, one neat place to explore a lot of work that's taking place all over the country is on the National Trust's Google Arts and Culture Hub. It's called Welcome to America's Chinatowns, but there's QR codes, I think, on every table that'll take you straight to the hub. But we feature the work of groups like Welcome to Chinatown and programs that they've done, corporate sponsorships, corporate partnerships, different ways that they're bringing press and activating young people and getting them involved in this community building, which, as you noted, is part of generations and what Chinatown has always done. So it looks a little different today, but it's still happening. And I think you can find some really amazing case studies. And shout out to my colleague Priya, who's leading that effort on behalf of the National Trust.
Did you have anything?
Well, I guess my answer would probably be this is a great time to start for young people who want to get involved, to join or go to this task force meeting and learn more about what they're doing.
I believe we have someone from the task force here today, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so welcome, and we will, anybody who's interested can go. Is it Barbara? No. Deborah, yeah, Deborah is here from the task force. I'm going to take another question. Penny? Can you stand up, please?
Thank you for your presentation. This question is for any of the panelists. I spent my undergraduate and graduate years here in DC, where I used to go to Chinatown, and for those of you who remember the old Paris, for instance, the dim sum place, that was the go-to place for community. So my question is, what kind of business do you think, Chinese business or otherwise, and draw back that kind of a good ingredient, what you mentioned, may offend somebody, but it's no good to anything in Chinatown. People might know what kind of go to small restaurants, yes, but on a bigger scale, what kind of business do you think will attract people and Chinese Americans back to Chinatown?
Well, I have an inside source that tells me that Peter Chang would be interested in going to Chinatown. So we hope that we can make that happen. We've tried to create a bit of community where we are in DuPont Circle. Of course, that is not Chinatown, but I think restaurateurs are right to go wherever there is money to be made. So.
I mean, Peter Chang in Chinatown would bring a huge draw, I would think. Yeah.
Any other questions? Hi, Zui. How are you?
Thanks. Thank you all for the presentation. My name is Zui. I have a question about the different kinds of Chinatown. So we all know that Chinatowns reflects the history of Chinese immigration in the United States. And so the classic Chinatown, as we know it, were mostly founded in the early part of the 19th century, and it's mostly concentrated with immigrants that came before 1965, right? And so it's more Cantonese, Khoisan based. But in the meantime, after 65, new kinds of Chinatowns, suburban Chinatowns have popped up. I live in Rockville, the suburban Chinatown in the area. And in New York, there was Flushing, where you have Taiwanese people started to settle in the 80s, and then from mainland China, post 2000. And there's Sunset Park in Brooklyn, which is full of Hokkien that came within the last 20 years. And those places are bustling with immigrant activities and mom and pop shops. So what do you think about these newer kinds of Chinese communities? Do they have anything to inform the older Chinatowns? Is there any way to cross-fertilize? Or do you think that the classic Chinatown should be should be preserved as something different, historic, symbolic, just different.
I'll start. I think that to a degree, Chinatowns have always formed, I mean, obviously there is a history of racial segregation that provides this context of the original Chinatowns in this country. The newer Chinatowns, suburban Chinatowns, we're seeing this trend all over the country where I think one of the reasons the historic Chinatowns are declining is because there are easier ways to get what you once could only get in historic Chinatowns now. You can get it online, you can go to these suburban malls, you can go to commercial Chinatowns that have popped up in recent years. They exist and they serve very important purposes for an ever-changing immigrant population. So I don't think it's my role to really judge them, but I don't think that historic Chinatowns should be preserved in amber. They should not be turned into museums. They still serve these very vital roles that only these places that have these layers of history can provide, that the newer Chinatowns cannot. For instance, a lot of newer Chinatowns, no one lives there. They're commercial destinations. They're places that, I mean, Flushing is different, but, and New York has, I think, how many, 8 Chinatowns? 9?
Yeah.
Yes, New York has 9 separate Chinatowns, but there's a lot of, they serve different purposes, and the historic ones provide this immense cultural value that keep, and they're a hub, and they keep people coming back to them for very distinct reasons, and we need to nurture that and ensure, if we want them to survive for future generations, we need to support them in authentic ways, but not freeze them in time.
Okay, I live in Silver Spring, and I know Rockville. Rockville is not Chinatown. And right now, we don't have a Chinatown in the suburbs like Flushing. So until you have a community where you've got the whole block or multiple blocks of Chinese American or Asian stores and grocery stores together, then you can possibly say it's Chinatown, but we don't have that yet in this area.
So I guess that brings up the question is, how would you define a Chinatown?
It's so broad right now. I mean, the historic Chinatowns are so different from in San Francisco, there's Clement Street, which has a Chinatown, and that's so different from Flushing, which is so different from Sunset Park, which is so different from Elmhurst, and there's one in Brooklyn called Homecrest even. So yeah, it's just so broad. But in answer to your question about how can historic Chinatowns take on some of the characteristics of these newer Chinatowns, the problem right now is historic Chinatowns in San Francisco, New York City, Boston, they're no longer a gateway for new immigrants. The rents are too expensive. Immigrants used to be able to get affordable housing in Manhattan's Chinatown. Now, I think right now the percentage of Chinese occupying or Asian Americans occupying Chinatown has continually decreased in the last couple of years. And rents are super expensive. So it's harder for a new business to start. And so that's why a lot of the new businesses that we're seeing are, what I'm completely appalled with, is bubble tea. And, bubble tea costs $7.50. One of my favorite restaurants in New York City's Chinatown, one of the old Cantonese restaurants, Hop Lee, has a lunch for $8.25. It just went up. It was like $7.50. You think of all the labor involved to buy the ingredients, wash, chop, slice, cook, and then how much profit are you making from that $8.25? And they sell a bubble tea for $6.75 or $7. Or there's now espresso stores in Chinatown where they're selling a cup of, cafe, a latte for $6. So the financial, the model, business model for making money is changing, and those old timer stores and restaurants are based on a completely 1950s business model. But that's part of the charm of Chinatown. When you go to Chinatown, they are cash-only businesses. They don't have websites. They don't have Instagrammable dinnerware, right? They don't care. And that's what I love about it. It's the real thing that you're experiencing. And yeah,
I think last time I went to New York, Chinatown, I mentioned that my kids were gonna go there for bubble tea, and I was embarrassed to tell you that. I was like, oh no, she's gonna judge me. But, I mean, going to the point about young people, I think we do need to think about what young people want, right? What unfortunately, what's gonna attract them, and if it's karaoke or hot pot or, bubble tea, that probably has to be part of the equation at some point, especially as the older generation gets older. Yeah.
I think for the locals around here, I mean, to me, like the Eden Center, Vietnamese town, think about that. All Chinese American, stores in front.
So is that it? Is that Vietnam town?
Yeah, Vietnam town, right? If you're asking, well, we have that in Maryland, or for us, Maryland, Rockville, imagine Congressional Plaza, all Chinese restaurants and grocery store in one place. Then that's a potential suburban Chinatown.
Interestingly, I was in Salt Lake City over the winter holidays, and there is a Chinatown there. That is
Las Vegas, have a strip mall.
There's a Chinatown in Salt Lake City that has a gate. Yeah, wow. And it's a mini mall. Yeah.
I'd like to also just plug kind of an academic response to the question, how do you define Chinatowns? But we actually, on the hub, we have a map where we kind of looked at the national landscape of what is a Chinatown, how many of them are there, how many have existed past, present, and future. It's not super comprehensive, but it is to the best of our knowledge comprehensive, but we've identified 83 Chinatowns, and they're kind of categorized in these different categories, these traditional historic Chinatowns, these revitalized Chinatowns, suburban Chinatowns, and commercial Chinatowns. And you can dig more into that. Sorry to keep continuously shamelessly.
So is Rockville on there?
I have to check. But the metrics we used were predominantly Chinese population and self-identifying as a Chinatown, because I think a lot of communities that today are home to the greater Asian American diaspora, and not every community they see their identities not represented in the name Chinatown. So that was an important criteria.
Okay, we're gonna take one more question, and then we will.
Hi, I'm Richard. Born and raised in New York City's Chinatown, Manhattan. Came out of DC's Chinatown in 1978. So I know about Chinatown. I'm associated with this gentleman here, Ted, because we're both on the 1885 Foundation. Every time I stand up to talk, he has anxiety. So I'm going to ask a question, all right, and then of the audience, and then I'm going to ask a question of the panel. Who here belongs to a family association? Raise your hand. 1, 2. Who here's parents belong to a family association? 1, 2, 3, 4. Who has relatives that belong to a family association? 4. Okay. The life and death of Chinatown is not the number of restaurants or fish shops. What makes every Chinatown so different and yet so similar is not what you see at the street level. Not the restaurants, the number of restaurants, the type of restaurants, how many fish shops, how many martial arts, schools are there. It's what occupying the second stories, the third stories, the fourth stories of this tenement. you would not have a Chinatown without infrastructures of family associations and its homes. There is not one Chinese family with Chinese American, second, third generation, fourth generation here in the United States that has not benefited from their family and relatives association with the Chinatown. Not because they own restaurants, but because we're members of the family association. Goes on. Fact. The survival of any Chinatown resides on the vitality of the family associations. New York City, right? We talk about, Brooklynese, okay? Family associations bring in relatives that are like themselves.
Can you explain what, just very briefly, and then we're going to turn it to the panelists, explain briefly what a family association does?
The family association way back in the 1800s, 19th century, when Chinese came to the United States, they're tied by their surnames. Lee's, Chin, Ang's, Yi's, and Wong. And they group together and create a family association that's tied to their home village, okay, or district. This is where we're family, right? And they help each other, housing, work, okay, loans, right? And it's a community support. What makes all these Chinatowns similar is that this family association extends to other Chinatowns. You with the Lee Association, right, Jack, Patty, you can go to New York's Lee Association and you're welcome. I went to Sydney, Australia, Melbourne, Australia, and I told a story. I said, when I was growing up as a little kid, my mom and dad said, if you ever got in trouble, if you ever needed money, if you ever need a place to stay, you walk into any Chinatown, you mention my name, my grandfather's name, they'll take care of you. When I was knee-high, my brother, my sister, myself, never believed me. Every time they bring up the story, and I lived the life of the gangsters in Chinatown. Every time they bring up the stories, we laugh and say, oh, don't worry about it, right? 2009, I went to Melbourne, Australia. I walked into the association, happened to be Chinese New Year's. I introduced myself to the big association. First question they asked is, where are you from? I said, born and raised in New York City, Chinatown. Oh, who's your family, what's your family's name, and so forth. I said, before I tell you all that information, I'm going to tell you a story. I told a story about, hey, if I ever got in trouble, all right. Because, okay, what's your family's name? I said, what's your grandfather's name? I said, he goes, wait a minute, let me make a phone call. Makes the phone call, and he goes, is your uncle by this name? I said, yes, my first uncle. Whatever you want, we're here to support you. That's how close knit Chinatowns are.
So what's your question for the panelists?
So the other question, and I look at you and I listen to your stories, all right? You get a different history than I do, okay? Family association is the life of the Chinatown. Okay, so when you talk about revitalizing Chinatowns, creating new Chinatowns, what have you done to investigate these associations that what I call the infrastructure of Chinatown? Right? You have family associations in every single one of these Chinatowns, and each of these family associations have annual meetings, right, and conferences. Right? That's how we are connected internationally. So the question of the panel is, have you done any studies, investigations as to how this infrastructure can continue? Because these infrastructure will continue to exist in Chinatown, but they own the buildings. Okay, how do you get young people into these associations and vitalize it back to the old philosophy of, unity, community, and so forth?
So I'm a cookbook author, and I'm called the accidental voice of Chinatown. my life just evolved into speaking up for Chinatowns. And so no, I have not been investigating what's been happening with family associations in terms of revitalizing Chinatowns. I can say to you that what's happened to Chinatowns all across the United States since COVID, Chinatowns were all in the decline before COVID, but COVID accelerated the decline of Chinatowns. And I understand from the people that I know in New York City's Chinatowns, many of the family associations that own buildings in New York City's Chinatown held the businesses to the rents that were owed during the worst period of lockdown, and did not support them and say, we're going to overlook the rents. So I don't believe family associations are the key and that they can revitalize Chinatown. They were screwing the restaurant owners and the people within Chinatown. And at this point, because of inflation and because of loss of foot traffic and tourism, and the fact that there is increased crime in all the cities, vandalism and anti-Asian hate crimes, all of the businesses are suffering, from Honolulu to New York City to San Francisco, Oakland, Boston. And I do not believe it is family associations that can uplift Chinatown. And I believe that every single American needs to do their part. I did a partnership with the James Beard Foundation, and we started a social media campaign that is support Chinatowns. And what I try to do when I go out is to remind people that Chinatowns are one of the things that make this country great. And what I try to do is remind people that all of us can make a difference, and that right now it's AAPI Heritage Month. And the best way that we can honor the Asian Americans of this country is to support the little mom and pop businesses. And this social media campaign that we did, Support Chinatowns, is just asking people that on Instagram or Facebook, just do a post about your favorite restaurant or bakery or shop and give a little shout out. And if you do it and your friends and your family do it, we have to support each other. So no, I'm not doing anything in connection with the family associations. When I was a child, we always had our Chinese New Year meal with the Young Family Association, but I do not believe they are the lifeline of Chinatown anymore.
Thank you. I did actually, I want to thank Ted Gong for coming from the 1882 Foundation. I reached out to him a little bit too late, but I did want to actually invite some residents, former or current, in DC Chinatown, and we will have that at our next discussion. I do think they are a very important part of the conversation, and part of the reason why these three are here is because they have served as voices, because for a lot of the people, they don't have that ability to make those connections. But I think that is extremely important, and thank you for bringing a perspective from Chinatown. So there is, I'm sure people's stomachs are growling, so we're gonna move on to the reception. There's food and drink outside, around the corner here. And I am selling copies of my book, On the Middle Road, about my adventures traveling from Beijing to Rome overland, exploring pasta and noodles along the way. And the $20 is just a donation. Will go half to USDET and half to 1882 Foundation, all the proceeds. So please pick up a copy of the book. I'm happy to sign it, and thank you for coming tonight.